If you look for it, every day has cause for celebration. Celebrate a friend for their promotion, baby wedding, life thing. Celebrate yourself for keeping the couch warm. It's no easy feat, especially if it's a big couch. Or maybe you just want to celebrate living in 2023, where you can get beer, wine, and spirits delivered from Drizzly in under 60 minutes without leaving said couch. So download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com and get your favorite drinks delivered today.
Progressive presents Adjusting to the Suburbs.
It never dawned on me how much walking I used to do until I bought a house in the suburbs. Like when I'd say, I'm going for coffee, of course I was walking, but now it's like 3 miles and no latte's worth that. I find myself inviting people on walks with me like it's a scheduled activity. This morning, my neighbor asked me what I'm doing, and I actually said, I'm going for a walk with Nancy.
Anyway, when you save with Progressive by bundling your home and auto, that's the easy part of adjusting to the suburbs. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliates and third-party insurers.
Hey, it's Mistress Carrie reporting for duty from MCHQ for episode 123 of the Mistress Carrie podcast. And before we get to this week's guest, author and U.S. Army veteran Brett Allen, I want to remind you about all of the things that you can find at mistresscarrie.com. Not only can you find all of the episodes of the Mistress Carrie podcast and every situation report, but you can also find all 204 episodes of my video show, Cocktails in the War Room. You can also get the links to all of my social media accounts. You can check out my blog and my photo gallery. You can shop in the online Mistress Carrie store. And to keep track of every show coming through New England, check out the event calendar. It's filled with concerts, charity events, and all of the places that you can come and hang out with me. And if you want to send me a direct message, you can do it right through the website. Just click the Message the Studio button. My guest this week, Brett Allen, is a husband, he's a father, he's a former U.S. Army cavalry officer who deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. He was deployed with the 3rd Squadron, 71st Cavalry Regiment of the 10th Mountain Division. That deployment was in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And during the deployment, Brett served as the squadron's air operations planner. He was the lead bootleg movie scout and was the linchpin in headquarters coffee production. That's according to his official bio, by the way. All of the experiences during his time in the military, the good, the bad, the strange, well, he's written a novel about it. It's called Kilroy Was Here. It's a tongue-in-cheek look at the American operations in Afghanistan, and he is my guest this week. Brett and I talked about his upbringing and what led him to join the Army in the first place. We talked about his writing process. We talked about the history of Kilroy Was Here. And we talked about the people that actually inspired the stories in the book. Kilroy Was Here may not be autobiographical, but it's pretty damn close. So allow me to introduce you to author and U.S. Army veteran Brett Allen.
Hey, what's up? This is Sully from Godsmack. Strap on those boots, baby, because you are now in the trenches of the war room with the one and only Mistress Carrie right here on the Mistress Carrie podcast.
What's up? This is Joe Rogan, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie.
Her hair so lovely, pretty eyes.
Hey, this is Brent from Shinedown, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie. Hey, Carrie, go put your bra on, girl.
Hey, this is Steven Tyler, and you be listening to the baddest bitch in Boston, Mistress Carrie.
What's up? This is Aaron from Stain, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie.
Hi, everybody. This is Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and you're listening to the one, the only Mistress Carrie.
Hey, this is David from the band Disturbed, and you're listening to the baddest bitch in Boston, Mistress Carrie.
Hi, Bruce Dickinson here from Iron Maiden. Yes, indeed, Miss Whiplash herself, Mistress Carrie, is here to unchain your brain.
Hi, this is Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You're listening to Mistress Carrie.
This is Dennis Leary. You are listening to my favorite, Mistress Carrie.
Hey, this is Corey from Stone Sour, and you're listening to, you have the privilege of listening to Mistress Carrie. Oh, God. Oh, yeah.
Brett, hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Any friend of Jonathan Hill's is a friend of mine.
Oh, he's a great guy. I met him, actually, this is going to sound like very like millennial, but I met him over Twitter. We actually connected because we were deployed to Afghanistan at the same time. So I reached out to him when I found out about that, and we've kind of hit it off since then.
Anybody that's not familiar with who we're talking about, First Sergeant Jonathan Hill was portrayed in the film The Outpost and was part of the Battle of Cop Keating and was on episode 4 of the Mistress Carrie podcast, which seems like forever and a day ago. But he's an amazing guy that had an unbelievable military career and is now so active advocating on behalf of veterans that it's kind of hard not to stumble on him on social media. So it doesn't surprise me that that's how you guys connected.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I mean, he was more than happy to get a copy of the book and read it and then help me push it on social media. He's been awesome.
So he reached out to me and was like, you need to talk to him and you need to check out his book because it's so different. So the name of your book, I have it right here because you sent me an autographed copy, which I appreciate. I'll put it in my library in the war room. Awesome. It's called Kilroy Was Here. And it's still a mystery as to whether or not the Kilroy Was Here drawings came from Massachusetts, but one of the working theories is that it was a rivet inspector that worked in the shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. So it's kind of got a little bit of a tie, but has that ever really been 100% proven? Because there's a lot of people that are claiming to be Kilroy.
Yeah, everything I've read says that it's still up for debate, but pretty much every source goes back to that being the original story of I think it's John J. Kilroy being the guy that started making the chalk marks around the rivets in the shipyard so they could pay people per rivet. And he would write Kilroy Was Here because people would start erasing the chalk marks and moving them to different rivets to get paid more. So he was writing his name on it. And then the troops on their way to Europe and the Pacific started seeing Kilroy Was Here in the hulls of these ships. So they took the message and started spreading it all over Europe. And so that seems to be the predominant theory of where it came from.
It might be like the first meme.
Yeah, definitely. The first viral meme.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Do you mind if we start at the beginning? Because I want to get to know you leading up to the experience that you had in the military that led to the book. So originally you're from Michigan, right?
Yes. Yep. Born and raised in Fremont, Michigan. I still live in right outside of Grand Rapids. My wife's a teacher in East Grand Rapids, and I work for a local law firm here when I'm not writing. So.
Does that mean you're one of the OG Tom Brady fans?
I'm actually not a Tom Brady fan.
I was going to say, if you say yes, it'll help you sell books in New England and in Tampa.
No, and to be quite honest, I don't follow football that much at all, but I went to Michigan State. And so anybody going through Michigan State, I would probably align with over U of M.
So born and raised in Michigan, and I think like a lot of people that ended up in the military in this generation, 9/11 had a profound effect on you.
Yes. Yep. So I was a senior in high school when September 11 happened. And I remember it very vividly. Somebody from the office coming into our morning class and telling us a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And I was 17-year-old kid at the time. I was like, what's the World Trade Center? And I'm thinking like a small biplane or something like that. And it was an accident. And then a few minutes later, another plane. So we knew it wasn't an accident. But I remember that whole day very clearly. And I had thought about joining up right out of high school. My parents had talked me into going to Michigan State, though. I had already been accepted there, so they're like, don't just get some school in before you make the final call on whether you go into the Army or not. So I got to U of M, and then in 2003, I remember watching the invasion of Iraq in early 2003, and just thinking to myself, why not me? Like, why am I allowed to stay back here and live my life like nothing's happening when people my age, people I graduated with, are crossing the line into Iraq? So I got to thinking again about dropping out of school and enlisting. And then my dad found a 2-year ROTC program at Michigan State. So it was for anybody who hadn't made the decision before coming to college. There was a catch-up program that you could go to at Fort Knox, and they basically taught you everything you needed to know in order to join up with the ROTC for your junior year. So for anybody who doesn't know, ROTC is like, it's officer training that you go through in college in conjunction with whatever your area of study is. So I did that catch-up program at Fort Knox. I was lucky enough to get a slot at airborne school the same summer, so I got to go jump out of planes at Fort Benning, Georgia. I got back to Michigan State and immediately signed a contract for my last 2 years, committing to 4 years of active duty after college.
It's important to note, too, that your parents weren't trying to keep you out of the military, because you come, like a lot of veterans post 9/11, you come from a military family.
Yes. Yeah. My grandpa was a Ranger in World War II. My dad had actually joined the Marines, but then broke his leg in boot camp, so he had been discharged. And so my mom didn't like it. Of course, my mom worried. My dad worried too, but they both understood why I was doing it, and they weren't going to try to block it. So my dad just wanted me to do what he felt was the smart way to do it with the opportunities that I already had laid out in front of me.
And so as I was looking at your bio and kind of doing some research on you, there were a couple of things that we had in common. And the fact that you're a jumper is one of them. Me on the civilian side, you on the military side.
Okay, so you've done skydiving?
Yeah, I still do.
That's awesome. I want to go skydiving. Like, that looks like so much more fun than what we got to do.
It's way more fun than what you guys did, unless you get into like the Halo stuff. But
right.
Even the military free fall jumping, you're loaded with gear. And, you're training to land in places that are no fun. Jumping on the civilian side with your friends, like naked and then chugging beers when you land, is like a completely different style of jumping altogether.
Yeah, they frowned on that in the Army. So
jumping naked or the beers after?
Both.
And I should note that the beers come at the end of the day, not after each jump. That's illegal. But the jumping naked, yeah. I mean, it could be dangerous. You're getting shot at. That's what you're training for.
Yeah. And and plus we're way lower altitude, and you're just trying not to trip on the feet of the guy in front of you as you're sprinting out the door. So yeah, it was different. We had guys get injured in all kinds of ways, both from like landing hard. We had one guy that got bit by a brown recluse spider as soon as he hit the ground, and he was out of the class. We had guys do they call it leapfrogging. So when you go out the door, you're so close together that sometimes your parachute will drift over top of somebody else, and their parachute steals your air.
You get in the burble.
Yeah. And you just go plummeting past them, then steal their air, and you kind of leapfrog all the way down if you don't get tangled up.
So is it didn't scare you enough that you don't want to do it on the civilian side? Because it's a way different experience. Every military jumper that I know that's gone on the civilian side is like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah, I would much prefer to do it on the civilian side. It seems way safer.
Well, if you ever come to New England, you're more than welcome to come with me and all my idiot friends.
That sounds good to me.
So you enlist, or I guess enroll is a better word, into this ROTC program in school. And you finally are in college with kind of a direction, because it's pretty easy to just get into college and be like, I don't know what I want to do yet. I'm just kind of here drinking beer.
changed my major 7 times on paper before I even joined the agency. So, yeah, I can't say that wasn't a considerable portion of the decision to join too. It was just, I didn't know what I wanted to do and other than serve. So that was a good way for me to check that block, but also kind of kick the football down the field as far as having to make a decision on the rest of my life. So I joined up and I ended up getting branched into the armor branch. So I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky right after graduation and went through Armor Officer Basic, which was essentially, at the time, it was all tank training. We learned all tank tactics and got to do all the positions inside of a tank: drive, load, gun, command. And then, of course, I was supposed to go to an airborne unit over in Germany. There were 4 of us guys that were supposed to go to this unit. And they pulled our orders 2 weeks into Armor Officer Basic. And so 2 of the guys got sent to JRTC down in Fort Polk, Louisiana to battle mosquitoes. And 2 of us got stationed actually at Fort Knox, where we had to be basic training XOs for a year, which it's not a dream assignment for a new lieutenant, but you'll never meet anybody more fun than basic training drill sergeants. I think Jonathan Hill, I believe, was a drill sergeant.
Yes, he was.
He will attest to that for sure.
Well, a couple things. First of all, you're obviously not claustrophobic if you wanted to go inside tanks for a living.
Yeah, they're pretty tight in there. And it gets real hot in mid-July in Fort Knox inside a tank.
And second of all, you probably got really good with the straight hand yelling and the screaming. Please tell me that you stole some of like Arlie Ermey's lines from Full Metal Jacket or something. If you're going to be a drill sergeant or a drill instructor, you kind of have to be funny while you're screaming at people.
Oh yeah. I didn't get to do any of the yelling like that. I tried to stay in my own lane as an officer and just let the drill sergeants do that. But it was one of my favorite days was the first day of each basic training rotation, because you get to watch all these fresh-faced privates come in and not know what to expect. And then just the drill sergeants get to let loose on them. And you hear anything and everything that could possibly come out of a human's mouth on that day. So
a day like that, and obviously basic training boot camp, the process is to basically tear you down, to kind of erase a lot of the things you learned before you arrive and then build you back up as a new person.
Yeah.
Which is why it literally starts from the bottom up, from the haircut, teaching you how to make a bed, teaching you how to dress yourself again. It really is kind of killing the old you and birthing a new you.
Yeah, and not just from the individual perspective either, because you survive things like that with the guys around you. So it really levels the playing field of everyone you're with. So there's no guy with better hair than you. There's no guy that's smarter than you, because everybody's getting torn down just the same. So it breaks you all down to the same level, and it makes it much easier to operate as a cohesive unit that way.
Everybody I know in the military, whether they went through basic or boot camp, still keeps in touch with at least one person that they went through it with, because it's kind of like the people you met like your freshman year in the dorms in college. It's that formative experience of bonding, and only those people understand what it was like at that time. Is that true for you too, that you still have friends from back in the early days?
Yeah, definitely. I still keep in contact with a lot of the guys from ROTC. The catch-up program I did at Fort Knox was kind of like a shortened basic training. So we got the whole drill sergeant treatment and all that. So I keep in contact with some of the people from there. I still keep in contact with a lot of the drill sergeants that I worked with at Fort Knox. All of those things, that the intensity of it shapes you as a person. I think you tend to hold on to those connections. So
9/11 changed a lot of things when it comes to the military, because before that, the recruiting tactics and the benefits of joining the military in any way, active duty, reserve, guard, was all about the GI Bill, the benefits, that you can go to college, that it's going to help you get jobs. Anyone that ended up in the military after 9/11 was painfully aware that you're going to end up overseas, most likely, that the odds are against you staying home and kind of skating through your 4 or 6 year commitment without ending up deployed, because you enlisted or commissioned watching war on television.
Right. And I think that's the unique thing about that this generation that has signed up post 9/11, especially prior to the end of Iraq and the end of Afghanistan. But you signed up knowing full well you were going. Like, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who signed up in that time frame who their intent was to serve in the military but try to avoid deployment. I think that was just a thing that you knew, signing the papers, was that you were going to be deploying at some point or another.
You wrote the book, and it starts kind of at the end of 2008 and goes through 2009. And one of the things that's so interesting about this book is that, unlike a lot of military novels or military books, is that it's not narrated by you, and it's not your firsthand account of your experience on deployment. And when I was going through it, the idea that you took your experiences, turned them into this fictitious story about these fictitious characters, I thought was a really interesting take on it. Why did you decide to do that?
For a number of reasons. At first, I love fiction. That's primarily what I read, is fiction. I do read some nonfiction, but what I want to write is fiction. One of my favorite books is Catch-22, and I love that book just because of how over the top all of the characters are, and they're just characters of what a normal officer or NCO or whatever in the Army would be. And I wanted to take that kind of feel, but I also wanted to tell it from a first person's perspective. So I'll say a lot of the events in the book, probably more than you would expect, have derived from actual events that happened. And while I was there, some of the stuff that was happening was so off the wall and crazy that I was just like, no one would believe me if I wrote a book about this and then called it fiction. So I finally was like, that's what I'm going to do. So a lot of the characters, I took pieces of people that I served with, both in Afghanistan and not in Afghanistan, and took those characteristics and kind of mashed them into characters that were hopefully equally as over the top as those in Catch-22, but also really recognizable to anybody who's served in the military. That's been one of the biggest comments or feedback that I've got, is that people instantly recognize a lot of these characters as somebody like a superior officer they had, or a chaplain they served with, or an NCO they had. And that's been probably the most rewarding piece, is knowing that I connected with people on that level.
One of the things that happens with the podcast, obviously, and as a civilian, but also as a military wife, one of the challenges is always bridging the civilian world and the military world. That if you write a military book, that sometimes your audience is only going to be military, and getting civilians interested in what's going on. And And one of the things I try to do is to always make sure that you're not leaving people that don't understand military jargon, military experience behind with the acronyms and the slang, because it's pretty easy for someone to get lost in the terminology and to then be like, oh, okay, this book's not written for me. So the way that you kind of wrote this book makes these stories, while they're all based in truth, accessible for anyone that has no military experience.
Yeah, so I've read plenty of military books, and it's always tough when, even for somebody that's been in the military, to deal with the alphabet soup that you get with all the acronyms, because the Army is notorious for even using the same acronym for multiple different things. So I wanted to make sure that I steered pretty clear of that. And I purposefully left a lot of that jargon out, just so I could make it more accessible. And then in the back of the book, I did put a glossary for the acronyms that I did use so that people could reference it. Although I wish I would have put it at the beginning. I've had a number of people say, like, thanks for the glossary in the back, but I wish I would have known about it before I got back there. So, yeah.
Like, you got to put a thing on the front page, like, look in the back before you read the book.
Page 302. So, yeah, that was important to me, to be able to make it so that people who didn't serve could understand it, because I feel like the book I wrote it's kind of filling the gap. There are a lot of people that served over in Iraq and Afghanistan that weren't door kickers, that weren't out there in firefights every day. There were a lot of people there that were just trying to keep the behind the scenes stuff together. And those narratives get left out in a lot of stories. So I wanted to make sure I represented some of the craziness that those people go through too.
Well, I think the breakdown when it comes to the military is that for every one person that pulls a trigger, there's 99 people behind the scenes putting the gun in their hand. Right. And when you think about it in that respect, with the number of people that were deployed to the Middle East in 20 years, millions step foot on that ground over 20 years. It just kind of gives you an idea of how big the military really is when there's that many people, the logistics, the transportation, the intelligence. I mean, it's down to the people that deliver the mail and the medics and the hospitals. I mean, it's a massive organization.
Yeah. And this book is for them. And that's why I'm trying to spread the word, because I think a lot of people would appreciate the story and recognize the characters and be able to relate to the main character. So.
One of the other similarities that you and I have, besides our love of jumping, is that I spent about 3 weeks in Iraq and another 3 weeks in Afghanistan as an embedded journalist. Oh, wow. And so the idea of the experience of someone in Afghanistan from a humor-based perspective and telling some of those behind-the-scenes thing, as an embedded journalist, something like Generation Kill was like the closest thing that I had ever seen that represented my perspective of being with U.S. troops as a civilian and as a journalist. And all of the behind the scenes, you guys always call it shenanigans, all of the funny things, the downtime, the time in the Humvees, sitting around at night, making small talk about ridiculous things, stupid challenges and what you can get somebody to do for $10 to keep yourselves occupied. There's so much of that. And those are sometimes the most important bonding times for people in the military is the times when you're not actually doing your job.
Right. Yeah. There's actually a story in the book that is very, very close to how it really happened, where the main character, the backstory to it is that the sergeant major and one of the officers keeps challenging the main character, who's a captain, to like in Bagram, they challenge him to see how many cookies he can stuff in his mouth in the defect, because they have these gigantic cookies. And so he does that, and there's an incident with that. But then later, when they're out at their fob, they've received like a couple packages of Peeps, because it's around Easter time, and they challenge him to see how many Peeps he can stuff in his mouth. So he thinks it's going to be just this low-key thing, but they end up getting basically all the officers and all the NCOs in the base to come into the operations office, and it's like a huge spectacle, and people are taking bets and stuff like this. So long story short, I stuffed 26 Peeps in my mouth, and I'm pretty sure I'm still the Eastern Afghanistan record holder. But we all collectively got in rather big trouble from our squadron commander, because we would cause such a disruption to everything going on.
Well, I was going to say, I wasn't sure if you'd cop to it, but the main character is kind of loosely based on you and your experience.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I mean, I definitely twisted things around and changed things, but most of it is based off from things that I either went through or witnessed firsthand. So,
people that listen to my show over the years on the radio spent a lot of time and money packing those care packages. We sent thousands of them. So to hear that things like Peeps were appreciated and definitely brought a little bit of fun and home to you guys warms my heart, because we were always trying to send not only necessities, but also things that would, make for some lighthearted times and to be able to kind of help you relax a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was greatly appreciated. So thank you for that. Because that was honestly, that's the highlight of any day or week, is when the mail trucks come in and you have something to open from home. So at least it was for me. So
I only spent 3 weeks in Afghanistan, and a couple of things happened. One, it took me about a month after I came home to stop coughing. And, and I was only there for a few weeks. And so there's all of this news now about the burn pits and the new legislation to help take care of all of the injuries that are coming just from the exposure that so many of our troops were around during their deployment. I tell people that all the time. So I was like, I was only there for 3 weeks, and it's not like I was literally the one dumping the stuff on the burn pits, but it took me a while to just be able to breathe again. And right. I always talk about my experience over there to kind of get people to understand. I only got this little snapshot, but I was always amazed at what was coming out of my face. Like what my nose could produce. I've never in my life as a person, besides maybe when I was a little kid, shown another person my boogers. And I did that almost every day in Afghanistan because the medic was asking me, because I was like, you'll never believe what is coming out of my face.
Well, you want to know what right looks like, right? If that's not normal, you got to know. So,
and also had so many conversations about my bodily fluids and my pee color and my bowel functions.
Yep, the medics get pretty personal. There's really nothing they won't cover, that's for sure. We were lucky we didn't have any burn pits on the small fob that I was at. We were pretty remote, but we were lucky enough that our brigade headquarters was a few miles up a fairly well-traversed highway, so they were able to get us some pretty legit latrine trailers, so there wasn't any need to be burning everything. So yeah, we were lucky in that respect. But I mean, I've heard the horror stories, and I served with guys that had to pull that duty on previous deployments where they spent full days out there just burning trash and poop, and yeah, it's crazy.
When you find out, okay, the inevitable's happening, you're headed to Afghanistan. I know that I was only going for 3 weeks for work, but not in a military capacity. So I know what I had to pack. And I also knew that I was going to be the only woman embedded with infantry units. So, there were certain things that I had to make sure that I was going to have access to. And when you find out that you're going to Afghanistan and you've got all the gear and all the stuff that you got to make sure you have with you, from a lighthearted perspective, you're also trying to find a little room in your ruck to bring some comforts of home and some funny things. And those are the things that always come out on those nights when you're sitting around with the guys. Talk to me about some of the things you were able to bring with you and some of the craziest things you saw other people just pull out of their ruck randomly. And you're like, when the hell did you get that?
Man. For myself, I don't really recall bringing anything too crazy. I mean, everybody brings a hard drive with as many downloaded movies as they possibly can bring. And that becomes like the thing that you do in your downtime over there. Was you would trade hard drives with people and take stuff from their hard drive and put it on your hard drive. So I think I still have mine. I've got like a library of bootleg movies on this hard drive. My former platoon, so I had been a platoon leader for 6 months before we deployed. And then I had blown out my knee in a training exercise. So I had to have like ACL replacement surgery and all that stuff. So obviously they took me out of a platoon and put me in a staff position because I wasn't in any situation where I could be going out on combat missions. But my platoon, unbeknownst to me, had stolen my Stetson, my cavalry hat, and packed it in one of their Connexes, and it deployed to Afghanistan with us. And then they busted it out while we were over there and made me wear it. So that was a pretty cool thing because like nobody else, we had like, it sounds stupid, but we had like a hat days on Friday where you didn't have to wear your proper military cover. You could wear like a baseball cap or something. So on the first hat day they busted out my Stetson and I got to wear that around. So. And it's down in my basement. It's still got dust from Afghanistan on it. So
that dust will never go away no matter how much you try to clean it up.
Nope. That is for sure.
When I arrived in Afghanistan, we brought with us the DVD of the Bruins winning the Stanley Cup because it had happened and the guys we were with from Massachusetts were already gone when the Bruins won the cup. So they let us have a Bruins night and they let all the guys wear Bruins gear. And we got a one eye and they put a sheet on the side of the building and we were able to watch the Bruins win the Stanley Cup. And it's always cool that every once in a while they kind of let you not have to have your uniform completely squared away and you can kind of goof off a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. They do a pretty good job of that. We had one NCO that I don't know how he did it, but he had like an entire entertainment center hooked up in his hooch. I don't know whether he bought cheap versions of stuff in country or if his wife shipped it to him, but like he would have movie nights with a bunch of other NCOs and they had like a pretty big screen TV for over there and they had surround sound speakers. NCOs are pretty good at scrounging stuff up in combat zones.
It's called resourceful.
Yes. They're masters of logistics.
Yes, they are. This podcast, I call it, if I describe it to someone, as like a rock lifestyle podcast because music is one of the most common threads that tie all humans together. And I know from my time, you talk about the hard drives with all the movies. There was also a thing when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan where getting in the Humvees, there was always the aux cable and who got to plug in their MP3 player to control the soundtrack inside the trucks. And it is such a strong memory for me that even to this day, and this happened in 2011, it's like it happened yesterday, that we were on a convoy going through Kabul and somebody just plugged in the random MP3 player. Everybody kind of put them in a hat, and you know, the guy in the passenger seat just kind of plugged one in and hit random. And it was one of those things where you just never knew what was going to come into your headsets. And Paul Simon's Call Me Al came on, and Fooch, the gunner in my truck, was doing the Chevy Chase, dun, 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 as we're on this convoy driving through the middle of Kabul. And it's really funny. It shows you how powerful music can be, because it really does align itself with memories and make it so vivid for you. So can you talk about some of the music and the soundtrack of your deployment and some of the songs that take you right back there?
Yeah, I can think of one in particular. So I was in our S3 office, our operations office. So I was the air officer liaison to our brigade's aviation unit. And I worked really closely with the S3 and the assistant S3, our fire support officer, and our S2. We were all the intelligence officer. We were all in the same office. And that way we were like kind of a one-stop shop for when the squadron commander wanted to come in and yell at us about PowerPoint slides. And so I don't know where it came from or how it happened, but it's stupid. But you know, MIA's Paper Airplanes.
Yeah.
So that song became like the theme song for every time a mission changed and we had to do an entirely new operations order or new PowerPoint slides or anything like that. So every time the SCO would come in and yell at us about something we did wrong operationally or a new operation that had to happen tomorrow that just nixed our plans for the rest of the day, like that was the song that went on, and we would all just play the song, buckle into our computers, and start going.
That's the song. All I want to do is zoom, a zoom, 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 and a boom, boom, and take your money. That's the song, right?
Yep. So every time I hear that song now, I'm back in the plywood operations office in the middle of Afghanistan. So
it is funny how music can really make you go right back there.
Yeah.
I text the guys I was on the convoy with all the time if I just stumble upon the song, and I'll videotape myself singing to it in the car or something, and I'll text it to them and just be like, just saying hi, I'm just thinking of you.
That's awesome.
One of the other things that happened while I was over there, and I don't know if it's something that they put in it. I don't know if I've been drugged by the military. I don't know if my DNA has been changed. For some reason, when I was in Afghanistan, every day while I was there, I craved Jell-O. I ate Jell-O 3 meals a day while I was there. And I'm pretty sure that my genetic makeup has been permanently altered by the Rippets that I drank.
Yes. It's funny you bring up Rippets, because I was just talking, I do gear reviews for Task and Purpose magazine sometimes, and they were actually doing a piece on energy drinks that veterans used to drink or still drink or that they recommend. So there was a lot of chatter about the little half cans of Rippet that we used to get over there. And there's actually a variation of Rippet in my book because a resupply of Rippets gets interrupted, which then interrupts all of base operations because people can't function without it.
Yeah, how are you supposed to function without the Rippets? You can't. They could have ended the war almost overnight if they just stopped the shipment of the Americans' Rippets.
Yeah, I remember guys trying to leave the DFAC with their cargo pockets just packed full of those cans of Rippet and like getting caught by the sergeant major on the way out. So, yeah, I drank my fair share of Rippet over there.
I usually look at the military and break it down into thirds. It doesn't matter the branch. You're either a country fan, a hip hop fan, or a rock fan. And that is enlisted, officer, Marine, Air Force, it doesn't matter. You're either a country fan, a hip hop fan, or a rock fan. What third of the military do you fall into?
I would be hard pressed to categorize. I can rule out hip hop, but I tend to split the line between country and rock and roll. I like country. My wife leans to the rock and roll. She grew up on 80s hair bands and stuff like that. So she's definitely cultivated my interest in that a lot more. But we're both kind of into like the newer bluegrassy country, like the Chris Stapleton and guys like him. But we're getting the kids indoctrinated into the rock and roll. This last year, I swear on their drives to school, we alternated between 2 CDs, and it was Queen's Greatest Hits and CCR, and that's all they wanted. So that's what we listened to, and they'd get tired of one, we'd go to the next until they got tired of that, and then we'd go back.
I talked to Ronnie Radke from Falling in Reverse recently, and we had a conversation about Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's one of those things there, if it comes on the radio and you don't sing along, he said it's like someone not liking dogs. You just can't be trusted if you can't sing along to Bohemian Rhapsody in the car.
That is true. I get really weird looks from the kids, though, because I get into it when Bohemian Rhapsody comes on. My son's favorite is Killer Queen, though, so he makes me play that every time.
That's a parenting win right there. Your kid's got good taste.
Yeah, I have no arguments against it.
Did you grow up with rock music in the house, or was it country?
It was country. My dad used to play it whenever we were in the truck going anywhere. So we traveled a lot for archery tournaments when I was young, and I have heard every country song prior to 1999 100 times. So
when you spend time overseas, there's always that inevitability, hopefully, for most that are fortunate enough to pack up and come home. And the packing up and coming home is obviously bittersweet in a lot of ways, because there's relationships that are forged in steel that you make. And when you're active duty, it's not like a National Guard unit where you're going to come home and kind of still all live around each other, that you're going to be active duty and kind of scatter to the wind when you get back. But there's also this idea of, if you lost people during that deployment, there's also that kind of survivor's guilt of your coming home when those people weren't fortunate enough to be able to come home. Can you talk to me about your preparedness on coming home and what that was like for you, and then what your adjustment was back in the States once you got back?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is true for all units, but we had in my mind, a pretty long decompression time before we got fully back. So we were in this remote fob in south of Kabul, and when the unit that was taking over for us came in, they slowly kind of took the reins from us, and so you slowly had less and less to do each day as they were taking over. And then from there, we flew back to Bagram, and most of us spent 2 weeks on the ground at Bagram, waiting for, I think there was a certain decompression period that we had to go through, but they kind of pitched it as we're waiting for the birds to be available to take us back home. So it was 2 weeks of laying around on a cot, swapping hard drives and watching movies, because there wasn't anything else you could really do. And then, so by the time you get done with the 2 weeks of just laying around after a year of going 24/7, you're chomping at the bit to get on that plane and just do anything to get out of there. So I think it was almost a sense of relief when we finally got on the birds to come back home. And then we had the welcome home ceremony that most units have. My parents and my brother had come out to welcome us back. So it was strange shifting the mentality of just hyper focus all the time and going from working 14 to 16 hour days to going back to a regular like 9 to 5 schedule. That was probably the weirdest of it. Just having that much more free time and having time to think about things. You spend a lot of time, and especially probably more so as the deployments got later into the war, you spend a lot of time just like worrying about your buddies, I think, because you know that a lot of people don't adjust well when they come back, especially those that have really been in some hard stuff and really seen some bad things.
And probably not for the first time.
Right.
That was the thing about this last 20 years of war is that, you know, there were people that served in, say, World War II that deployed and then came home. Same thing with Vietnam. You did a year, you came back, and you never went back again. But this war would send people for multiple year-long deployments. And so the effects of those deployments were compounding.
Yeah, and like especially on families too. Like you, not only are you worrying about your families, but your friends, but you're worrying about your friends' families and how that dynamic shifts as soon as you come home too. I was, I guess, fortunate enough at the time I was a single guy, so I didn't have that adjustment to come back to, and I had arranged before we deployed home to live with three of my fellow officers that I had been working very closely with over there. So I think for me, that was like made the transition that much easier because I just lived for a year with these guys working very closely. And now we're living together stateside and working closely together. So it was a fairly easy transition in that respect. But
it used to be a lot more common. You talk about something like a World War II deployment where the guys were all on the ships coming home. That was forced decompression.
Right.
They couldn't get home any faster. I remember leaving Kabul, flying out of the Kabul airport, which, there's a whole podcast episode that I did with the producer that went with me and kind of what a scary experience just Kabul airport was because our military guys couldn't go into the airport with us. And you get on a plane and next thing you know, we're at Logan Airport in Boston, 16, 18, 22 hours later. And we're standing in the middle of Boston, still covered in Kabul. That's the dust we were talking about. Right. And I'm holding an iced coffee and I'm back there. And I was like, but I was just in danger like less than 24 hours ago. That downshift is like hitting a wall. And so the idea that in modern wars, you can be in a war zone 1 minute and home the next, that decompression period, I think as annoying as it is to be sitting around Bagram with nothing to do is kind of important too.
Yeah. I will say one of the strange things that coming back was not having a rifle on me at all times. Because when you're deployed, you have a rifle that you are accountable for 24/7 and it goes with you everywhere. And then you come home and one of the first things you do is you turn in your rifle. And then for a week afterwards, you're constantly looking for that rifle because you feel like you should have it at all times.
It was the exact opposite for me. Now, I grew up in a Navy and firefighting family, so there weren't a lot of guns around. So I had a pretty healthy fear of guns back in the day. And when I was in Iraq in 2006, the idea of getting used to the guns being everywhere all the time, that you guys had them in the chow hall and they were just on the table, and that you kind of had them like people grab their cell phone or their purse at home.
Right.
For me, I had to adjust the other way to get used to them being around. The first gun I ever loaded was a 50 cal in Iraq.
That's awesome.
And so the idea of like, you know, if you're not around them a lot, to get used to them being around all the time. And for you, it's the exact opposite. It's like now you come home and it's like, wait, it's not just normal for somebody to have a sidearm and a rifle and like all of the stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, that's to go full circle. That's one of the things that gets drilled into you at basic training. Like, that is an extension of your body and it better not be out of reach. And to then go back to not having it, it just feels weird. So,
I do a lot of talking, obviously, about veterans, advocating on behalf of veterans. And especially using my trips overseas as kind of examples to be able to kind of explain to civilians what my experience was like, because I obviously wasn't in the military, but, you know, got to peek at the great and powerful Oz a little bit behind the curtain. And people have told me for a long time that I should write a book about my experiences. And anytime I talk to anyone that has written a book, I ask them the same question. To me, the blank page or screen in front of you is this hurdle that is so high to jump over. When you made the decision to write the book, how did you start? Because to me, that seems like the hardest part.
I did everything wrong so many times. So when I started outlining this book, probably back in 2012 was when I started outlining. And I had this rough idea of what I wanted to do. And so I put down kind of like a general concept. I knew I wanted to follow like a year-long deployment. At the time, I was thinking I would follow 3 different characters and write it in the third person. And so finally I was just like, you know what, I was reading different books on writing, and pretty much all of them were like, the biggest thing you got to do is just sit down and write. So I did that. I just started knocking out chapters, and I got about 13 chapters in, I think. And I was like, this is garbage. So I was getting frustrated with like the character shifts and the perspective shifts. So I narrowed it down to a singular first person, and I kind of took those 3 characters and just merged them into one. And the rest of it went fairly smooth, writing the last 14 chapters. And then I had to go back and completely rewrite the first 13 chapters to fit in with the last ones.
And when you say chapters, it sounds like you wrote a 700-page book, but the chapters are short and very easy to read. There's just a lot of them.
Right. Yeah. And there was a lot of editing. Like my first draft was about 120,000 words, and in editing, I cut out a quarter of that. So I cut it down to about 90,000 words. And that was like a huge learning process too, was doing the editing rounds. And that in its essence is my favorite part. Because when you're writing a first draft, you're kind of, for me anyway, you're throwing crap at the wall to see if it sticks. And the way I've kind of started taking the approach to writing the new stuff that I'm doing is like, I force myself to sit down and knock out at least 500 words a day. And some days I'm like, all this crap's going to get edited out, but I have to get my 500 words in. And sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. But then when you go back through the editing, you're like, okay, I can take this and I can move it here. It's like trying to solve a a puzzle with all of the different pieces that you've created over the first draft.
I went on vacation recently with my husband and the family to Key West, and we went on the Hemingway tour.
Yeah.
And that's the Hemingway approach, that we saw his writing room, and every morning he would get up first thing in the morning, and he would not allow himself to leave his writing room until he had written so many words, but he held it at, they also had to be good. So if it took all day, he couldn't leave, and sometimes he could bang it out in a half hour, and then he'd allow himself to leave. But that's very Hemingway of you.
Yeah, he's like, I haven't read a ton of Hemingway, but what I have read, I like, and like I appreciate his approach, kind of like a no BS approach to writing. I've actually started my own personal challenge. I started on July 1st, and I'm seeing how many consecutive days I can go writing at least 500 words a day. So every day I've done it. I went on a camping trip earlier last month, and I brought a notebook with me and went out in the middle of the woods and knocked out my 500 words each day. So it's just, the process is so much easier when you hold yourself accountable like that, because it's very easy to put it off until the end of the day and then decide you're too tired to do it. And then pretty soon it's a week and you haven't written anything. Like that was my plague during the process of this first book, is that there would just be times where I was just too terrified to sit down and write because I had no idea what I was going to write next. But once you write that first sentence, it all starts to flow. So
what was the reaction of the guys that are portrayed in the book? Even though it's not them, what was their reaction?
Pretty much everybody I've talked to has loved it. So I made sure to be clear that like none of these were like specific people. And I mean, I think people know like, hey, I was involved in that situation.
In those shenanigans.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, good example is the Doc Johnston from the book, the medic. He's very close to a good friend of mine. And I know that there were some illicit tattoos being given while we were over there. So that gets played into the book a little bit. But yeah, everybody I've talked to that has read the book has been like, this is awesome. I forgot about this, or I forgot about that. Thank you for writing this. So
never cross the docks. They know all the secrets.
Right. Yes. They'll turn on you in an instant.
So you write the book, it's finished. It comes out in 2020 in the middle of a crazy pandemic. And now if you're on this writing challenge, are you picking up where you left off with the first book, or now you've obviously gotten the bug to write? What are you working on now?
So I have one book that I just completed. I had a couple of months ago, I had a professional editor go through it, and it's to the stage where I'm in the process of trying to find an agent to represent it, because you can't really get in front of any big publishers without an agent. So if there are any agents out there listening, I have a...
You never know. It wouldn't be the weirdest connection that got made on the Mistress Carrie podcast, that's for sure.
Well, it's actually about a small town in Michigan who they've had the same mayor for about 70 years. And then this mayor gets murdered, or I should say slaughtered. And everyone is trying to figure out what has happened. While at the same time, there's like this emergency election that has to happen to replace the mayor. And there's a extremely left-wing candidate and an extremely right-wing candidate that kind of use the fear from the mayor's death to divide the town against itself. And have you ever heard of the Michigan Dogman?
No.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the Beast of Bray Road?
No.
Like kind of like a werewolf type creature? So that's like a legend around northern Michigan, is that there's this dog man, and there's documented sightings of this thing since back to like 1887. So I pull in the legend of the Michigan dog man into this, and the main character is like this washed up town football player who his big thing is he's like a dog man hunter, kind of like a Bigfoot hunter. And so
now the Bigfoots we have where I come from.
Yeah.
It's very squatchy around here, we've been told.
Okay. So, I mean, you can relate them because it's the same type of myth as this dog man. And he's been trying to figure out for a long time how to capture one of these things. And so the book itself is a dark comedy, again, kind of like Kilroy, but it kind of plays off from the ridiculous political climate in America right now, and just highlights some of the absurdity of how communities are divided against each other over kind of crazy things.
So the writing bug gotcha.
It did. And on July 1st, when I started this self-made challenge, I started a new manuscript. So I'm working on something new now.
Well, if there's a place in there for like a purple-haired radio DJ, you let me know.
Okay.
And if it gets made into the movie, you let me know. I've always said I wanted Sandra Bullock to play me in a movie, but I think she would look badass with purple hair.
Heck yeah. My wife will actually be very jealous because she really wants to dye her hair purple. So,
well, there's no reason she can't. She's not in the military. Or is she? She might be.
Well, no, she's an elementary school principal.
Ah, that'll do it.
Yeah. So I don't know that her bosses would allow that. But she has told me that as soon as she retires, that's happening. So,
see, now my husband tells me when he retires from the military, he's not cutting his hair or shaving for a whole year.
I think that's standard procedure, actually.
Seriously.
I mean, Jonathan looked like he got pretty shaggy. I saw some pictures of him before he got his most recent haircut, and his hair was pretty long.
Yeah. Long hair, big beards. You know, now they've relaxed the tattoo restrictions a little bit. So, you know, it's like even when the guys are still in, they're pretty sleeved up and whatever. But then you get out and it's like neck tattoos, face tattoos, knuckle tattoos. I mean, you still have short hair and it looks like you've shaved in the last week. So you haven't gone full Sasquatch yourself.
Yeah. I'll admit I can't grow a beard. I've tried. It just doesn't happen for me. Yeah, I keep it fairly trim just to hide the fact that I can't.
Well, it's always the first thing that goes gray on a guy too. So if you have a beard, it starts going gray. It makes you look older. So
yeah,
there's that.
Yep, I'm starting to get some salt and pepper. That's another reason why I keep the sides pretty short. Is I'm seeing it.
Civilian life will do that to you.
Kids will do that to you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. How would you feel if one of the kids grew up and wanted to be in the military based on your experiences?
I would understand it. As a parent, I don't know that I would ever like push it on them. But if one of my kids approached me and said that they were thinking about joining, I'd probably take the same approach my parents did and would be like, okay, well, let's take a look at what the options are and let's do it the smart way. So
would you push him to get commissioned like the old man, or would you let him be a resourceful enlisted guy?
I don't know. I see the merits in both ways. My grandpa was enlisted, and he never talked much about World War II until he found out I was joining the Army. And then he found out I was going to be an officer. So all of his stories were about the terrible officers they had and how not to be a terrible officer. So it was cool, though. He was actually my first salute when I got commissioned. He came to the commissioning ceremony, and there's a tradition where you invite an enlisted person to be your first salute, and then you give them a silver dollar. So he was my first salute as a young second lieutenant. It was pretty cool.
That's very cool. It's the same with my grandfather in that they never really talked too much about everything that they did. And then as they get older and when you lose them and you realize that you never got to hear all of their stories. And so we've done a lot of research on my grandfather's service since he passed. And, then you're like, oh man, I wish that he had told us what he had done because the stories are amazing.
Yeah, I've done a bit of research on where my grandpa was at. He was with the 1st Ranger Battalion, Darby's Rangers, when they were in North Africa. He participated in the invasion of Salerno. He told me a story about how he almost got shot by a sniper. Like he felt the wind of the bullet off his back before he jumped behind a wall. He actually got wounded during the invasion. Did I say Salerno? I meant Sicily. But he was in the invasion of Salerno, and he got wounded there. Took a 88 millimeter mortar outside of his foxhole, and then he was sent home because he had a huge hole in his thigh. But we actually have a lot of the letters that he wrote home. My aunt saved all of those, and now I have them. And it's just funny to read those and hear the things that he felt was important enough to write home on the medical ship he was shipped home on. He's talking about how the nurses were really nice and they gave him ice cream and all this stuff. And it's just kind of cool to see that because it's not necessarily a side of him that I got to see very much as a young kid.
They put the ice cream in Forrest Gump for a reason because military guys love ice cream.
One cool thing we pulled out of all of his memorabilia stuff was he actually brought home a dagger, a Nazi dagger. So I have this old Nazi dagger that it's carved into the blade. It says "All for the Motherland" in German, and it's pretty intense.
That's amazing. Well, I am so glad that you hung out with me today, and the book was so different. When John Hill reached out to me and he was like, you got to check this book out. It's unlike any other military book you're going to read. And he was right. And that's what I love about it is that you kind of took your experience and turned it on its ear a little bit and not only made it more accessible, but also kind of pulled the curtain back in a way where you weren't trying to be vicious to anyone specifically, or that it was just a different perspective. And I thought that was really creative and interesting. So thank you so much for hanging out on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time. I'm so glad that Jonathan connected us because this was awesome.
Tell your wife when she retires, I got plenty of purple hair dye stockpiled up and I'll make it the most beautiful shade of purple she's ever seen.
I will do that.
There he is, author and U.S. Army veteran Brett Allen. Now, if you're interested in his book, Kilroy Was Here, you can find the link to purchase the book in the show notes of this episode. You'll also find the links to his official website and all his social media links, and you'll find the link to hear episode number 4 of the Mistress Carrie podcast, featuring First Sergeant retired Jonathan Hill. You can also check out the corresponding playlist for this week's episode. I put together a playlist for every episode of the Mistress Carrie podcast and fill it with the music that gets referenced in each episode. You'll also find all the Mistress Carrie links in the show notes as well. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and follow the Mistress Carrie podcast, and make sure you share this episode with all of your veteran and military friends. The most common way people discover new podcasts is by referrals from their friends and family, so I would appreciate the referral. New episodes of the Mistress Carrie podcast come out every Wednesday, plus every weekday you get the Sit Rep. The Situation Report has got all of your rock news, music headlines, and entertainment updates, and it only takes 5 minutes. Plus, you can catch me every Tuesday night at 8:30 Eastern, live on my Facebook page for my video show, Cocktails in the War Room. The Mistress Carrie podcast, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network.
If you're looking to get a new car, you could really cut expenses by bundling your car and renter's insurance with Progressive. Sure, you love your old car, but you know it's not normal to give instructions on how to open the window. It should be self-explanatory, but it's not. And notice how when you're in other people's cars, you can feel cushion in the seats? That's pretty nice, right? No, it's just normal. So bundle your renter's and car insurance with Progressive and put the savings toward a new car. It's time. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliates and third-party insurers.
At the Home Depot, we're dedicated to helping you build the skills that get your home projects done right. That's why we offer free and interactive online DIY workshops. During the live streams, our knowledgeable associates help you tackle your DIY projects no matter your age or skill level. You can learn how to install new single-pole switches, as well as standard duplex and GFCI outlets. Register for free at homedepot.com/workshops. The Home Depot, how doers get more done.